Hello everybody, and thanks for joining me tonight. I am digital artist Aaron Rutten, and I'm going to be doing some live stream digital art using Corel Painter and a Wacom Cintiq 27 drawing tablet, which you can see here. To make it fun and more interactive, we're going to do an abstract painting, but you all as the audience are going to help me decide what it is that I'm going to make. And to teach you something, because if it was just me painting abstract, there'd really be no reason to watch. I'll go through some of the principles of abstract painting, because while you might look at abstract art and go, oh, I could do that, you know, and some abstract art is literally like this. Watch how long this takes me to do this. Okay, I have seen stuff in real life. It's taken me a lot longer to do it for some reason tonight. I have literally seen stuff at the Seattle Art Museum that looks like this. And this is in the museum, and it's probably worth a lot of money. And it's a yellow square on a white canvas. Now, is that art? Yes, it is art. This is art, you know? This is my piece right here. It's called Absolutely Nothing. And if I make up some story that I pull out of my butt, I could sell it, but that's not the kind of artist that I want to be. And I'm not trying to knock abstract artists, but I feel like, yeah, it's art, and I understand your point, but do something more than, you know, draw a square on a canvas. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to do anything that simple. So feel free to request some things. They could be objects, they could be colors, they could be shapes, they could be patterns, anything. Throw out anything and I will combine it. Somebody threw out a horse, a car, abstract background, sunset with trees and mountains. Okay. Anime character, but make it realistic. Sunset with trees. So let's do the abstract sunset starting out. So part of why you would want to draw or paint an abstract, part of the appeal there, and I guess for me, not for everybody, people do things for different reasons, but part of the appeal is that you can be very spontaneous about what you do. And if you overthink it too much, then, I don't know, it just doesn't turn out as good. So I'm going to zoom out really far here. And I'll just go ahead and just tone my canvas, why not? And I'm just going to just put in some stuff. I'm going to not really focus. Like, I can intentionally focus when I'm really trying to concentrate and draw realistically, but it takes a lot of effort, and it's a unique skill on its own to be able to break your focus in a sense when you're painting. And that, in layman's terms, is basically just be faster and be more sloppy. But be intentional. It doesn't mean that because you're being sloppy that you're going to make a bad painting. Being sloppy and being spontaneous gives you a much looser result, and that works really well for abstract art. So I feel like in here maybe we'll have some orange too, and we can just begin mixing this together. The brush that I'm using here is the smooth palette knife. All these brushes, everything that you see here in these workspaces, this whole layout, this is all available in my custom Corel Painter workspace, which you can download from my website, aaronrutten.com. So maybe that'll be the sky there, and I do want to blend it a little bit more over here. Okay. And then somebody within that same suggestion had mentioned trees. So how can we do trees in kind of an abstract way? Let's use some selection brushes, maybe. I'm going to hold Shift, and that's going to let me build up this selection. I'm just making this up as I go along. And that's also one of the great things about being an artist is that, do a couple undos. One of the other great things about being an artist is you can make things up as you go along. You don't have to show up prepared. And I certainly show that in all of my live streams. Now, what color do I want to do this? I'll add to this tree a little bit here. Feel free to throw out some colors for the tree, because I'm inclined to do it in kind of natural colors, but maybe that doesn't make sense. Jazz has a question I'll answer while I'm waiting for some color suggestions. Jazz says, would you say it's better to draw zoomed out rather than zoomed in, at least until you get to the smaller details? I've always drawn zoomed in, and now I'm questioning that. It depends on the piece. I don't think there's any one way that's better than another. In this example, the reason why I zoomed out really far is because I was blocking in a big broad area, so it wouldn't have made any sense to really be zoomed in. But if I did want to do a background and clouds that were more refined, then I might want to zoom in. Typically, I'm usually just working at whatever fits best on my screen. So if we go back to the view of my hand here, like if I were working on, let's say, the painting of the Super Nintendo that I did, and you can actually see within my videos, unless I've cropped it down to where you can't see what's on the outside. Usually you can see where I'm zoomed in, and most of the time I'm kind of in like a middle setting, but there's certain times when you want to zoom back out. I'm just going to adjust this lighting a bit here on this. Pardon me for just a second. I'm going to brighten it up because it's feeling a bit too dark. The thing with this camera here is it's very specific about what it wants you to set it to, and so depending on the colors in the painting, it could be too light or too dark. Anyways, like in a portrait, for instance, I might periodically zoom out and make it really small to evaluate how it looks small. Same thing with a still life, but then if I'm working on an eye or a nostril or something that's really, really close where I want to be really accurate, of course I'm going to zoom in really, really close. So I think there's no global way to do it that really makes sense. You know, I guess for me, globally, like I said, I'm staying in the middle here, and I'm using what fits on my screen, and I'm trying to make my interface as minimal as possible while still giving me access to everything that I use frequently. And this is partially for comfort's sake. You know, like I want to be comfortable while I'm working, but at the same time, a lot of the things I do are to make it easier for you to follow along with me. And if I have a consistent workspace that doesn't have a bunch of stuff dropping down and blocking the view of the screen, that just makes for a better video. If I do a speed painting, I don't want menus constantly popping up. And so I zoom a little less than I should sometimes, you know, like in some videos I might not zoom at all, and that's because I'm trying to intentionally keep the view on the screen still so that it doesn't jump around a lot. But, you know, go through and watch some of my videos and just kind of see what I do and how I zoom. We got some suggestions, blue, purple. We'll do both blue and purple, and I'll answer some more questions here because I see some other good questions. Okay, so I think I want to add a few more leaves here. Being spontaneous again. I'm just peppering it in. It's like when you put ketchup on your eggs or salt on your food or pepper on your food. Do you think about where you're going to place every single little grain of salt? Or do you just, you know, what do you do? Same thing goes for art. Just sprinkle it on. Don't overthink it. You know, if you're painting something and you're going for like ultra realism and accuracy, sure, be a little more careful about each little stroke when you get down to those fine details. But if you want to paint in a looser style, or you just want to paint for fun, or you want to paint abstract art, just put it in. Because if you overthink it, it's going to show. If you do things intentionally and you think too much about it, you end up making these patterns that just don't look right, and they really stand out, and that's because you're trying to make something the way you see it. You're not letting it develop naturally and organically and randomly. If I had thought about how to draw every single one of these squares and rectangles here, for one, you would have tuned out and probably gone to sleep, because it would have taken me, 15 or 20 minutes to draw each of those squares if I thought about where I wanted them. But this just works a lot better. It's fun to make abstract art. So that is the start of the tree, and then let's do that. Speaking of zooming, here's a situation where I need to zoom because I just want to focus on just the tree area. I'll do a little bit of this, and then I will answer some questions here. Could spend a lot of time on this, and I think I will spend some time on it. Okay, so Paul says, do I use a screen protector? No, I don't use a screen protector. You don't need a screen protector for a Cintiq. I haven't used all of the other tablets out there that are Cintiq alternatives, so I can't say whether or not those need a screen protector. I have heard that some come with a screen protector, and I know that in my experience using certain models, the screen was really glossy, so you would probably want a screen protector to try to diffuse some of the reflections, and at the same time you wouldn't want it to stick to your hand because, well, it's like your cell phone, or I don't know, you're like any other kind of screen. If you rub your hand against it, your hand kind of sticks. But on a Cintiq, I can show you here, it's a little sticky, but it's kind of smooth. Like your hand can glide across it, but it can get some friction to where if you need to plant your hand, you can, or if you need to get friction for your stroke, you can. The pen isn't too slick. It has a little bit of tooth or a little bit of grain, kind of like paper would have, but it's very slight. So the screen is really like conditioned. It's not just like a screen like you'd have on your TV. You might think like it's just a screen, what's so special about that? Why does it cost so much? Well, it's because it's not just a screen. It's a screen that's made specifically for drawing on, and not just drawing on occasionally or for 6 months, like for drawing on for years and years and years and years. From people like me, like I draw on this thing nearly every day. So I don't want just a generic screen that somebody pieced together with a generic digitizer. I want something that's built by people who are making the product for people like me. I know I'm very passionate about it, but there's a reason. It's like when you want to help people out, you want to give them good advice. You don't want to just, and I guess good advice is really, it's subjective. What I think is good advice, other people could disagree with, and that's totally fine. But when it comes down to it, I want people to make good decisions. I want people to learn from things that I consider mistakes. If I would do something a different way, if I could go back and do it a different way, that's something that you should share with people if you feel that way about something. So there's, tablets that in the past, old Aaron probably would have enjoyed them and used them if he didn't have anything better, but once you use something like this, you see why it's a little pricey, because it's worth it. But do you need something like this? No. A lot of the art that I made, if you go to my website and you look at my portfolio, a lot of that art was made with just a regular tablet, not a fancy tablet. You can make great art with a mouse. So what I'm doing here, I'm gonna go ahead and just fill some of that too. what I'm doing here is I'm just creating some visual interest, but also creating kind of a logic, because abstract art might seem like it's not really about anything, but it can have subtle underlying messages, and those messages don't need to be a story, but they can be a pattern that's consistent throughout the piece, or a logic. And a logic would be like, most squares have another smaller purple square in the center of them, or maybe more than one. That's a logic. Another logic is that I used blue for all the squares. Another logic is that I used squares and rectangles. And so what I mean by a logic is that's a reason why you did something, or something that maybe you did intentionally, that other people can pick out and go, oh, okay, I see that pattern, or I see why you did it that way. And then you can break from that logic. You could have a rectangle and then cut another one out of that, and there's just one O-shaped one, while all the other ones are just solid rectangles. And then when people look at your piece and they go, oh, it's just a bunch of squares and rectangles, man, you can be like, no, actually it's a bunch of squares and rectangles, but look, there's, rectangles inside of rectangles, and can make up a story about it. And that's why the person who painted the yellow square on the white canvas can get away with it, because when someone says that's just a yellow square on a white canvas, they say it's a square sun on a white sky. And then, you can't really argue with that. So I'm trying to strategically fill some negative space here too. I don't need to get every single square. I don't really care about that. I'm putting them wherever they feel right, and that's just something that you do based on instinct, and you don't overthink it, you just do it. It's not going to be any better if you overthink it. In fact, it's probably going to be worse. So I'll go with something like that. Then we'll zoom back out. That's kind of cool. Let's look at it on the other screen here. It's not bad so far. So as far as zooming goes, I zoomed out of necessity, really. But now I want to look at it and evaluate it, at normal size, whatever that is. And that's kind of something you have to consider too. What is the intended viewing size? Most things you're going to want to be able to see the whole piece without having to look around, if it were printed in real life. Obviously not really a problem with the screen so much, and more often than not when you're sharing things online, they get thumbnailed and they get very small anyways. So you want it to look good big, you want it to look good small, you want it to look good in the middle. You want to definitely tackle all of those things. And while you're working, you need to look at it big, medium, and small as well. But in the end, the one that really matters the most is where you want people to be viewing it from. I would encourage you to really kind of almost make that obvious to your viewers, Don't post the full-size version of something, because then people are always going to zoom into it and look at it really close and see all the even if it's not just seeing the flaws, you didn't really want them to focus on an elbow or a nose or something. You wanted them to get the whole piece, to get the whole message. And you can do that through composition. You can do that through lighting. You can do it through focus. There's all kinds of ways. Vignetting, to bring the focus into a certain point in the painting. So I'll just catch up on a couple comments here, and then we'll move forward with this. Paul Russo wants the Cintiq Pro 32 coming out in January 2018. That does look like a nice tablet. I wonder what's the end game for this though? every few years you're just going to get a couple more inches. Until what point? Do you need... Because it's the same thing with TVs. Like I go to the store and I'm like, 50-inch TV, that's a big TV. Who needs a 50-inch TV? And then I go back a year later and there's a 60-inch TV. And I'm like, damn, that's an extra 10 inches. It's a big TV. And then I go to Costco a few weeks ago and there's like a 72-inch TV and it's like a damn wall. Yeah, it would be cool to have a 72-inch TV, but a 72-inch screen? It would be cool, but there's a lot of fatigue involved in moving your arm around that much. I noticed a difference drawing on the Cintiq just having to hold my arm up to the screen, because normally if you're drawing on a regular tablet, one that doesn't have a screen, it's sitting flat on your desk, and so you're resting your hand and your arm at all times, and your arm doesn't get fatigued in the same way. I've painted murals on walls, big whole entire wall-size murals, and when you have to stand on step stools and ladders and reach out and do all this painting, it really hurts and it's really uncomfortable, and you wouldn't want to do that day in and day out. Part of being able to do art digitally is to be able to do it comfortably and quickly. And because you can zoom out, you don't have to really, you necessarily have to make big broad gestures all the time. Kitsune Soul says that's a cool painting. Thank you, Kitsune. Paul likes it a lot so far. Thank you, Paul. Super Mario thinks it's looking awesome. Thank you, Super Mario. And then back to the size of the screen. I had a 24 before the 27. It's a difference of 3 inches diagonally. I don't know. It's bigger. That's nice, and I think the screen resolution being higher matters more than anything. But if I had to still use the 24, it wouldn't be a problem, because it's still a nice big screen and it's still a good quality product. So whether your screen is 13 inches or 22 or 24 or 32 or 16, it doesn't really matter all that much. Size doesn't matter. Unless it's too small. Like, there are these tiny tablets that are like 4x6 and even smaller. You don't want to get something like that. That is not going to be good for drawing. That's like trying to get dressed in the shower or something. You wouldn't get into a tiny room to put your pants on. It would just make it way more difficult. It's just like that with painting. You don't want to be like all ready to start drawing and painting, but you're locked inside this little box. It's not fun. Susan says, click like if you're watching. Yes, Susan, please do. Susan has great advice. And there is the super chat button that I will just throw out again. It's that little $ icon down at the bottom of the chat next to the emojis. And if you click that, you can super chat, which will pin your comment or your question or your drawing request to the chat, and I'll see it and I'll draw it or I'll answer the question, and it will help support my channel and these live streams. Keith is here. Good to see you, Keith. Thanks for clicking the like button. Okay, so let's do some more work to this here. We have a tree. And it's totally fine if you can't do the super chat, no worries. Just being here and watching makes me happy. I'm just looking back through the comments to see if there's anything. I'm sure I missed lots of things. Airplane in the sky. Well, let's throw out some more stuff here. Birds in the sky. I like that, birds in the sky. I'm just going to sort out which layers are which. This is a tree. And I'll try to keep this zoomed in so you all can see it. Plenty big. Birds in the sky. When I get ideas, like if I'm thinking of a concept right now, like how do I want to do it? If you want to know what was just going on in my head, there's probably about 3 or 4 things that all simultaneously came about and then like branched off. And I realize in deciding how you don't want to do it, you can decide how you do want to do it. And so sometimes you don't want to just think of a idea and then go, okay, I've got that idea. That's what I'll do. Sometimes it pays to think of a few other ways that you might do it, even though you're not going to do it all 4 of those ways. You can kind of juggle them real quick and weigh them in your head and go, actually, this one way might work better than the other. So what I was thinking is I could draw each bird individually, or I could make a brush of birds and I could paint the birds in with a brush. Either way would be fine. I think it's kind of balances out time-wise, because it would take me time to make the brush, but at the same time, if I drew each bird individually, it would take me time to do that. It just depends on how many birds I want to make. I think I'll just do them individually, because I don't want to do a lot of birds. So I'm going to stick with this blocky theme here. I'll draw some birds. Something like that might look kind of cool. I'll do this on a separate layer too. Some digital looking birds there. Paul has some good advice. If you click the bell icon, you'll get notifications for my videos. And hopefully everyone's been enjoying my increased production schedule. I was kind of posting maybe 2 videos a week for a while there, but now I've gone back up to 5 or more a week. It's a lot of work. You know, I'm definitely trying new things and doing kind of shorter ideas, but I feel like that gives me more variety of content. You know, I'd love to do a really awesome realistic still life painting every time, but for one, not everybody wants to see that. You know, there's lots of people who watch my channel, so I'd like to have a little bit of for everyone. But at the same time, it also takes a lot of time to do something like that, and it's just not practical. Like the Super Nintendo painting and the controller, I spread that out over days, you know. Total, the controller and the console took 15 hours, but it's not like I sat down for 15 hours straight and did it. You know, I'd paint a little bit and take a break, and paint a little bit and take a break. So, you know, it's a tricky thing being a YouTube artist. You know, you really have to, I mean, you have to push yourself as an artist to be productive anyways, but to have an audience that follows you, that puts a little more pressure on you. And I'm actually going to make a video talking a little more about this, but people always want to talk about what's your motivation for making art. Well, if you have an audience and you have, you know, people who support your channel on Patreon, for example, people who subscribe to your channel, there's pros and cons of people having expectations of you, and this is certainly one of the pros. But it motivates you to want to make something for those people because they're going to watch it. But at the same time, people feeling like you owe them something is not a good feeling. You know, when people wield it in a negative way and say, you know, oh, I don't like this video, or you're running out of ideas or whatever, it's like people will use it as an excuse to insult you. But they're, you know, it's a couple of people will do that, whereas most people usually have a positive reaction towards it. Genesis says, make sure to sub. You guys are making it easy on me tonight. Maybe I'm just forgetting to say all these things, and you're like, tell him to subscribe, man. Geekatron wants to know, when am I going to do another draw pile stream? I don't know. Let's hear from you, the audience. Do you like the draw pile streams? Because the thing is, they're fun, but I feel like I'm a little held back by draw pile. I don't know. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles that I'm used to. But do I really need that? You know. And I guess the draw pile streams aren't really about me drawing, anyways. They're about everyone else. So maybe that doesn't matter. But I don't know. I mean, I think if there's a lot of demand for it, I could certainly do more. I never know what to do. It's like, for one person to manage as much stuff as I do is already pretty incredible. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but I'm just acknowledging that I come up with ideas for videos, I produce the videos, record them, make the artwork, run the channel, promote the channel, answer comments, do live streams. You know, I do everything. And I'm just one person. So I have so many ideas, way more ideas than I could ever execute. Welcome to the Music would like another one. Genesis wants more. So four people would like it out of people that are watching tonight so far. So that's almost 1/5 of all the people watching tonight. I think, you know, I'll definitely do more. It's just, how often am I going to do them? That's kind of the question. Let's draw some more birds here. Talking too much tonight. Quick birds, not overthinking them, just making them. No mistakes, just birds. And it's an abstract piece. So if someone ever comes up and hassles me about this and says, hey man, those didn't look like birds, I'm gonna be like, well, those are my birds in my fantasy world, and that's what they look like, so deal with it. Keep hitting Control D when I meant to hit Control F. We need a little one back here. And then on top of that, we're going to do some dark spots like this. It looks pretty ugly up close or far away, so I know I'm on the right track. And that's kind of the thing when you're experimenting. You know, sometimes you make things worse, sometimes you make them better. So I think that what would be cool for this is maybe highlight some of the edges in a couple places. All right, so we got our birds. You might be thinking, man, those are some crappy birds. You could do better than that. I know it's abstract, but you could do better than that. And you're probably right, but I've got news for you. I am going to make these birds really awesome. And actually, you know what? I'm going to do it in Photoshop. Let's just save this as words, PSD. And then I'll just open that file in good old Photoshop. Okay. Susan would like me to talk a little bit about my Corel Painter courses I have 2017. There are quite a few courses that were made with 2017. Older courses will work with newer versions of Corel Painter, whereas newer courses will not work with older versions in some cases. It depends on what I'm using. Usually I end up using the newer technology. So, for example, the thick paint courses that I have out now are not going to work with 2017. But a lot of the older courses will. I guess if you have specific questions, I'd be happy to answer those. But they're very similar to my videos. They're just really long videos. They're a little more structured, and so there's, for instance, it'll tell you what I'm doing up in the top right of the screen. You know, if I'm painting the sky, it'll say painting the sky. There'd be a little tab up there so you know what section you're on. I try to highlight things more, you know, I'll put a little animated box around the brush I click on and just try to really make it very understandable and easy to follow without being too long and without being too short. And that's something that I'm getting better at as I go along because it's a very tricky thing to do. And people have had a lot of success with those courses. People who thought they'd never be a painter have learned painting and can do the things that I can do, and a lot of them can do a better job. You know, when I'm demonstrating, I don't always do the best job because I'm just kind of going through it and I don't want to spend forever on it. But people who really take their time on the lessons have done things that just blow my mind. And it's nice to see people in particular. I can think of several people in particular, Tom and Richard. They both make paintings on their own. You know, they're their own ideas, but you can see in those paintings techniques that they learned in my courses, and it's advanced stuff. It's like painting like really complex historical barns and, you know, just really detailed things. It's awesome to see that. You know, I'm sure without me they may have been able to learn this stuff elsewhere, but maybe not. And it's nice to feel like you're contributing something unique as an artist. So I encourage a lot of you who want to be artists and get exposure for your work. Maybe education is not really your primary goal, but education can in some ways satisfy a lot of your artistic goals, you know. I'm teaching people how to paint, but I'm also still showing off my artwork, you know, and people are still seeing it. And maybe people are more likely to see it because there's I don't know how to really quantify it because I don't have like actual factual data, but I get a feeling that more people are interested in learning how to make art than are interested in buying it, you know, and looking at it. Like, it's fine if people want to look at your art, but if people are just looking at your art for free, that's not paying the bills, you know. You have to turn that into money somehow if you're trying to make a living as an artist. Belinda says, I'm overwhelmed by all the brushes. I spend so much time looking through them all. I'm still new at this, though. I have trouble sometimes catching which brush I'm using. I try to, as far as highlighting the brushes, I think that really helps, and I try to make it pretty clear and like say which brush I'm clicking on and do it slowly. But as I start to get through the video and I get kind of worn down by the editing. I don't want to like highlight every single thing, and I don't know if that would make it easier, but I kind of feel like if I've already shown you where one brush is a couple times, that's good enough. But I'm open to suggestions, because if it would make it easier to have every single brush highlighted, every time I click on it, I think that makes sense if that's easier to follow. A few people have told me that the tutorials are too short, and I'm thinking 4 hours is not short. Because I'm editing that video and I'm watching a 4-hour video over and over and over again to look for mistakes, and so that might be why I don't make them too long. But also part of it is if I'm doing something that I've already explained, like when I was drawing the rectangles, I filled in the gaps and I talked about some stuff, but I didn't really say much of anything, and that's because there wasn't really much to say. I explained why I was doing it, and I didn't need to repeat that while I was drawing all the rectangles. So that's also part of it. There would be long, awkward pauses, which don't work well. Anyhow, I talked a lot in between going into Photoshop and then doing this. On the birds layer, I'm going to go to Blur Gallery, Path Blur. And I'm gonna make a path here. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a blur that follows a curve. So there's a sense of motion that we'll see appear here momentarily. So now those very ugly pixel birds they kind of feel like they're actually existing in this place now. They're moving through the air. So I will save this as a PSD again. And that's the wonderful thing about working digitally. Another one of the wonderful things is there's cross-compatible file formats, like the Photoshop file format, where I can work on the same painting across 2 applications. So what Photoshop does better, I can let Photoshop do, and what Corel Painter does better, I can let Corel Painter do. Paul says, I used to obsess about brushes too. Trust me, they're less important than just focusing on the fundamentals. You can get the same effect with a lot of the standard brushes. Yes, that is good advice, Paul. A lot of the brushes can give you the same result, but there's also a dozen different ways to do something, and there's a dozen different brushes that you could use to get a completely different effect. I could have drawn these birds a lot of different ways, and I just did them using the selection brush. There's a lot of brushes that do the same thing or something very similar, and so you can kind of like once you find one out of that set of 20 brushes that do basically the same thing, the one that works for you and gives you the look you want, save that one and just don't worry about the other ones. You put them in a custom workspace like this. You can take any brush out of here. If you hold Shift and you drag the brush out, you can put it in its own little palette, or you can put it in one of these existing palettes with other brushes. Do like I did here, get the brushes that you like all together, and then don't worry about the other ones. And this seems like a lot of brushes here. It is quite a few, and there's multiple little tabs of brushes and things like that. I don't need that many brushes, honestly, to do most of my paintings. I use a fraction of them on a daily basis. Like, I would say 10 or 20 maybe. I can do, most paintings with the airbrush and digital or detail oils, scratch board, chalk sponge, maybe the glow brush now and then, diffuse blur, coarse oily blender, and then, maybe a couple specialty brushes here and there, and I can get by on that. The specialty brushes are nice because you might want a certain effect, like a leaf or a mountain or a rock texture, then you need those. But once they're there, and once you got a good collection of brushes, it doesn't matter. Like, have I used every single one of these brushes here? No. And there's a lot of versions of Painter out there. There's a lot of brushes I've not used, and I could be missing out on something. There could be some cool effects that I don't know about. But I feel like I can paint such a wide variety of things using the brushes I have that's good enough for me. Like there's no advantage for me to use other brushes that I'm not using unless they do something better, and then in that case it makes sense. But if you keep up with Corel Painter and what it can do, and if you understand how to make brushes and the different technologies, then you have a pretty good idea of what's possible. And so then in that sense, if you have a better idea of how the brushes work, you can imagine, like you don't need to see all the brushes. It may seem like there's 2,000 brushes and they do 2,000 different things, but there's really 2,000 brushes. I'm making up a number here. It's not 2,000, but however many brushes, hundreds of brushes, but they all follow the same core principles. And those are found, they're kind of in a tree. There's kind of a hierarchy. There's the trunk, there's the big branches, then there's the smaller branches. The trunk is kind of like your dab type. You have your static bristle, you have palette knives, you have air brushes, you have ink brushes, you have watercolor. You can make watercolor brushes do a lot of different things, but that's a type of brush. So then you can get into stroke type, and then methods. These are like subcategories of how the paint interacts. And then if you want to get really, really detailed, then there's advanced brush controls. Give it a second to open up here. And these are all the different properties of the brush that can give you endless different results. And you can combine all these different settings to get a lot of different properties and things like that. You can even combine it with brush expressions, which can give you other results that you wouldn't normally get. And it may seem overwhelming, but honestly, if you take the time to learn it, it's not too bad, and then it makes a lot more sense. Some of this is still like whoosh, over my head, and I have to really spend a lot of time like studying it to be able to even grasp how it's working. But fortunately, a lot of these things you can hover over them and it gives you a little tooltip, or you can go to the help menu and then hints. The hints panel is nice because let's say I'm using a brush like thick paint. If I select a thick paint brush, then hints tells me all about the thick paint and how to use it. Or if I select a watercolor brush, then hints updates and tells me all about how to use watercolor brushes. So it's easy to learn that stuff. It's not like you have to learn it all at once, but it's also not like you have to know every single thing about Painter. Just know enough to be able to get by. Okay, enough talking. What else do we want to add to this piece? Somebody said mountains. Also, I might be doing just all suggestions by one person. I'm sorry if I am. I kind of like this blocky theme, and I think if I break outside of that, it's going to look kind of odd. And I wonder if I shouldn't. I think I should. I think I should save this. And I think I should open it up in Photoshop again. Susan says, would I recommend the Corel Painter 2016 course if I have 2017? Do I talk about details on brushes, for example, like I am now? Yes, I do go over some of that stuff, not in like super dense detail, because it would just be a lot. It would be a lot of useless stuff for most people to know. And I kind of explain how you can experiment and kind of figure out more stuff, but I do go over a lot of the basics. The beginner's course was created with Corel Painter 2016, but a lot of the stuff in Corel Painter doesn't change, as far as the interface, and the things that do change are usually pretty minor. So I have two options. One is every time a new version of Painter comes out, which at this point is yearly, I'd have to redo the entire course, and most of the course content wouldn't need to change. It's still all applicable to future versions of Painter, with a few exceptions if something changes. and that would take a lot of work. So I'm not going to do that. The other option, which is what I've decided is better, is to make modules. And so you would take the Corel Painter 2016 course, and then if you happen to upgrade to 2017, then you take the 2017 module, and that'll teach you everything that's new in Corel Painter 2017 and what's changed since 2016. Then when 2018 came out, I released a module for that. And so then when you upgrade to 2018, you learn that module. So it's not perfect, but it seems to have been working fine for people so far. I've sold a lot of that course, and then quite a few of the modules. So, you know, at some point I probably will have to make a more updated version, but it's just it took so much effort to do that I don't want to redo it, and I just don't know that. I think the modules are probably fine for most people, but feel free to comment and let me know. I could be wrong about that. There is some redundancy, you know, if you go through the 2016 course and there's an easier way to do it in 2018, you're not going to know about it till you take the module. But in some ways, that makes it more digestible, because then you're getting a good chunk of stuff all at once, and then you're getting a few more bites of the newer stuff to where it's not everything all at once. And if you have an idea of what's changed and why it's changed, you might have a better perspective on how to better utilize those things. And I'll often talk about that, you know, like why it's easier in this version compared to the older version and how you can take advantage of that. Snowy wants to know if I think the Wacom Cintiq 27 price will lower due to the new products. I really just, I don't know. I would guess, you know, like I don't have any inside information, but typically things that are outdated technology do become cheaper. Right now it's, I think, about 1900 or something, 1899 or somewhere around that. Correct me if I'm wrong. The previous Cintiqs went down quite a bit. What it's going to come down to is they're just going to quit making them, and so they'll sell off all of their, you know, everything they have, and then it'll be up to people to sell used ones, or, you know, things like that. So once the original stock is gone of new devices, then it's going to start to get cheaper because it's all going to be used. You know, I sold my 24 for not very much, you know, definitely not what it would have gone for brand new. So just gotta wait and see. Sometimes patience pays off. Okay, so I'm gonna add some mountains. There I go, talking again too much. Oh, no, I'm not gonna add mountains. I'm going to do what I said I was gonna do, which is apply a filter. There might be this filter in Corel Painter, but I don't want to hunt for it. I don't remember off the top of my head where it's at. Yeah, wrong layer. Wrong layer. And I'm going to layer this up a bit. You'll see what I mean here in a minute. These ideas just come to me. I don't go looking for them. They pop up in my head. So what I'm going to get here are different layers of blockiness. So the pixels will be bigger and smaller in different areas, basically. And then I'll just merge those layers together. And we will save that. And we will open it back in Corel Painter. So now the background is more blocky. It fits in better with everything else, more consistent. Now we can do the mountains. And those mountains, we will make them a bit darker. And make sure that what I end up with here is a nice closed shape. Let's see if something like that will work. Yes, it does. And we'll go darker. And do another layer. See, if I'm slower about it, it doesn't look as good. When I was doing it really fast, there's more variety to it, less repetition. And we'll fill that in. Do another layer. We'll jump over to another color here. Break out of our logic. It's kind of fun doing something abstract. Yeah, it's coming together. So the background will need some depth. I don't know that these are mountains. It kind of looks more like distant trees or something now. So I'll go with that. Maybe these will be little trunks. That'll be the logic there. Still keeping with the rectangle theme. But these will represent trunks. Okay, what color should the trunks be? Feel free to shout out a color. And while I'm waiting for your suggestions, I'll try to catch up on questions. Paul wants to know, Dell Canvas Yay or nay? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to really say if it's good or not without using it, but from what I understand, it's basically a Wacom Cintiq, just with a Dell logo on it. So it's going to be a good quality product. You know, it's just whether or not it's that much different from the actual 27. There are a few minor differences. There's some things that are better and some things that are worse. Price is also a factor. You know, if it was like, if you had a Dell Canvas 27 or a Cintiq 27, you're going to be good either way because they're good products. You know, I definitely recommend a Dell Canvas over something like You know, I'm not gonna. There's just so many alternatives that I wouldn't recommend. But basically, the Cintiq alternatives that are really, really, really cheap. You know, they're cheap for a reason. Belinda has to go. I'll see you later, Belinda. Thanks for watching. Susan wants to know if I could choose only one. Would I choose Corel Painter or Photoshop? I have both, but it seems like so many people use Photoshop. Photoshop and Corel Painter work together, so I need to have both because there's, you know, I'm gonna do all my painting in Painter because, as the name implies, it's a painting application. It's mostly for painting. Photoshop is mostly for image manipulation, and it has some painting features, but it's not really ever been intended to be a painting application. Corel Painter, on the other hand, has always been for painting, and it has some image manipulation features, but they're just, you know, there's the right tool for the right job. You know, a Swiss Army knife has all kinds of tools, but are you really going to punch holes in leather with a Swiss Army knife? Are you going to scale a fish with a Swiss Army knife? Yeah, it's got a fish scaler. Or saw. Are you going to saw through anything? What are you going to saw through with a Swiss Army knife? So get an actual saw for sawing. Get an actual screwdriver for driving screws into things. Use Corel Painter for painting. Use Photoshop for image manipulation. And I use Photoshop for a lot of my paintings. You'll see me do it in my videos all the time. And I actually do have a course about what you would use, or what I use Photoshop for, you know. A lot of the other stuff that doesn't really matter, I skip over, and I focus only on the things that Photoshop can be useful for from a digital artist perspective, you know. Bulk editing your artwork, or cropping it, or resizing it, or changing the colors around, or, you know, there's just so many different things that you can do in Photoshop that you can't do in the painting applications. And Photoshop does a lot of things that Corel Painter can do, and vice versa, but Painter does some things better, and Photoshop does some things better. Like text. Painter has a text tool. It's not the best text tool. If I need to add text to something, I'm going to do it in Photoshop. And because I can save as a PSD, I can work between both applications, as I've been doing here tonight. In Susan's world, you can't have both. Well, it depends. If you're doing painting, and that's really what you care the most about, then Corel Painter, without a doubt, because there's just, people argue and say Photoshop is better, but I don't really see how they can say that, because Corel Painter can just do so many more things than Photoshop. There's a certain style that people paint in. I've heard it referred to as plasticky. It definitely looks a certain way because they'll only use a few brushes here and there. And the kind of looks that you get in Corel Painter you can't really get in Photoshop without a lot of workarounds. So let's see, colors for the trees. Dim brownish gray, black, gray. I like gray, I'll go with gray. We'll do it a little bit brownish, but not much. And I feel like that color of brown I want to hunt around a little bit more for. So I'll cool it off a bit so it fits in tone-wise. It must look like buildings in the background now. So now we'll just do that to the ones that are in front of it. And we'll do a color for that. Basically the same color, just a bit darker. Now it's starting to get some depth. But basically, Susan, if you're asking if I was on a deserted island and I can only bring one application with me, would I bring Photoshop or Corel Painter? I'd without a doubt bring Corel Painter, because I'd be able to do so many awesome paintings on the island. Whereas with Photoshop, you know, it'd probably be more useful for like editing photos of the island. So I could paint in it if I had to, but you know, there's no advantage to really handicapping yourself. And I think that goes both ways. If you're more comfortable in Photoshop and you don't feel comfortable working in Painter for whatever reason, and Photoshop works for you, there's no point in switching, really. You know, no one has to take my advice on that. But I started out with Photoshop, doing painting in Photoshop before I even knew about Corel Painter, and so it's not like I'm completely naive and I don't know what Photoshop can do. I've been using Photoshop since I was a teenager. You know, I've been using it since before you would even ever consider painting with it. And I've settled on Painter because I've tried so many different art applications that I have a pretty good idea of what's going to work and what's not for me. So there we go. We got some hills or trees or something in the background. And then play with the focus a little bit. I'll just add some depth to it. I don't know if you can see that. I'll zoom into it so maybe you can see the background. The background gets blurrier. Kind of an interesting piece. Now I think what I will do is I will add some sort of flavor to this. I know I just made it look really ugly, but give me a chance here. I spent a lot of time drawing these squares. While I'm doing that, I will try to catch up on comments. Gear's here. Gear Duran is here and says Corel Painter is the shizzle. That's no surprise. Corel Painter Master Gear Duran. Good to have you joining us tonight. Lots of squares and rectangles here. This is a good day for square and rectangle drawing. Okay, that just made it look hideous. Let's try some other composite methods here and see if that helps. Just experimenting here. Like I said earlier, you don't know what you want until you see what you don't want. If this doesn't work, we'll get rid of it. And I think it does not work. So, not going to do that. Let's try again. Let's try something else. Let's try something less extreme. That's kind of cool. Do before and after. I think that helps. Let's do another layer, overlay. Purple this time. We'll add a mask to that. And I'm going to mask away in the center there. And then add another layer, set it to screen. I'm going to do a little detail on some of these here. You know what? I think I'm going to turn on perspective guides. Helping some of these edges stand out here. You know, this is the kind of the thing with making stuff up as you go along. If you'd asked me ahead of time to imagine this scene in my mind, I don't think I could have done it. It's not that I'm incapable of seeing something like this in my mind. I certainly can. It's that, well, I mean, besides you all helping me and giving me suggestions, it's that, you know, you don't have the ideas until you cobble them together. And sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it's like putting together a puzzle. There's certain areas where you can figure out where the eye, like where the nose is, because you have a piece of the eye. Like you can't see the whole puzzle, but you know if you have this piece of the eye and that piece of the eye and you put them down and generally where they should be, you can start to see the pieces that should go around them. Like you can see the other half of the eye or the eyelid, or you know what I mean? So certain areas almost give you kind of like a roadmap or a marker, and you can build off of that. It's the same way with art. You might put something down, like a tree or a mountain, and then all of a sudden, in your mind, it makes you imagine a lake underneath it, or something else to go along with it. And it has to happen in that order sometimes. Being kind of quick about this, you know, this is a detail that I could spend more time on. If this were not for demonstration's sake, I probably would. I wouldn't be rushing through these lines. But, you know, I was also talking about not overthinking it, and that would be overthinking it. Does it really matter in something abstract for it to be perfect? No, because this is not reality. It doesn't need to be held to the same standard as a still life or a portrait. You saw I just zoomed out there just to take a peek at it, see how it's looking. I'm going to save it too. Let's answer some comments here. Sorry if I miss people's comments and questions too. I do my best to try to get most of them if I can, but it's a lot of comments. Nothing wrong with that. It's good that everybody's talking amongst themselves. That's why Super Chat's there. If there's something that I'm just totally missing and you really, really need an answer to a question, if there's something you really want to see me add to the drawing, Super Chat. There's no way I'm going to miss a Super Chat. It's like it's pinned to the screen. And it has its own Super Chat window in my interface for the live stream. Oh, just reading through the chat here. Drago says people say that Photoshop is better because it's more simple, so it's easier to learn. I look left on of my stream and I'm confused what's going on there. The thing is, though, it's not normally like that. I mean, there's some palettes there, but this is not the default Corel Painter interface. This is all customized, and it's actually really cool that I can customize it, because you can customize Photoshop to some degree, but without third-party plugins, you know, there's some things that you really can't do. Or maybe I'm not aware of how to do them. I mean, the fact that I can make these are all custom icons that I made. I made each of these icons. I made the text and I made the actual brush stroke to show what the brush does. In being able to arrange things this way, it might not make sense for you, but it makes sense for me. And that's really how this workspace started. It didn't start as something that I was going to share with people because I was making videos, because at the time that I created this workspace, it was when I was just doing paintings for myself. And I wanted it to be set up in a way that was very quick and very easy. Like, if I sit down at my desk to draw with traditional art supplies, I've got all my acrylic paints in one bin, and I've got all my brushes in a jar, and everything is organized in a place where I can remember where it's at and get to it very easily. And that's kind of how this is here. Like, I want to know exactly what I'm getting. I don't want to have to look through menus and lists and stuff. So there's a lot going on, and it gets more and more complex each time. But that's because I want to very easily be able to get to something rather than having to like hunt through a menu and click a whole bunch of times. So yeah, it's a little overkill, but it certainly doesn't have to be that way. Like, you can have a very, very minimal interface with Corel Painter and have basically nothing on the screen and still be able to do a lot of painting. A good example of that would be if you watch my digital painting outdoors videos. I'm painting on a Wacom Cintiq companion, so it's a mobile tablet, and it has a smaller screen, so it doesn't make sense to have all this junk on the screen at all times. And so you'll see that I can actually get quite a bit of painting done without showing a lot on my screen. Photoshop is simpler in a sense because it has less, you know, like, there's a lot of properties for each brush, but when it comes down to it, it doesn't do even a fraction of what Corel Painter can do. And in fact, you can import Photoshop brushes into Corel Painter, and then you can add all kinds of stuff to them that Photoshop couldn't do. And there's no reason why you have to use one or the other. Like, I understand cost is an issue, obviously, but for a lot of professionals who can afford to have both applications, use both, you know? Do some of your painting in Photoshop, do some of it in Painter. I might use 2, 3, or 4 applications to create a painting, and I might use Illustrator in some paintings if it makes it easier. So I don't have a problem using the right tool for the right job. I don't feel like I have any sort of allegiance, you know, to one or the other where I have to strictly use Corel Painter. And I don't know why people have that silly attitude about software, or even about digital or traditional art in general. Some people are like, I can only do traditional art, or I can only do digital art. You can do both. A lot of the best artists out there right now are doing both. See you later, Gear. It's good to see you. Snowy's got to go too. See you later, Snowy. I'm probably going to go a little bit longer here, and I'll probably wrap this up too. So, what else do we want to add to this now? Let's do this. Let's go ahead and save. We'll drop all. Now we'll get really crazy with it. All right, you didn't see that coming, did you? That's kind of cool. Susan says, did you just call me silly? I wasn't referring to you specifically, but just in general, there's kind of that attitude. So if you learn one program, in my case, Corel Painter, then do you think it's easier to learn the other? I have both on my computer. Photoshop and Corel Painter are very, very similar applications. I may have made mine look nothing like Photoshop, but if you took the time to arrange your interface in a way that looks like Photoshop, it could be quite the same. I mean, let's say the layers palette, for instance. You know, I can even just do a couple comparisons here. My advice would be use both. You know, that's using one or the other just doesn't make sense to me. To each their own, but okay, so layers palette, let's take a look. We have a tab that says layers, we have a big rectangle, and we have a bunch of layers that are stacked, and we have a layer icon, we have a layer name, we have a mask, we have a composite method up here at the top, we have the opacity. There are a few other things that Corel Painter doesn't have, but if we look at Corel Painter, layers, composite method, or blend mode. Here's the layer, there's the icon, there's the name. Down at the bottom, there's add layers, there's add a mask, there's delete a layer, there's lock a layer. So this palette is nearly identical. The color picker is a little bit different. It's a triangle, whereas in Photoshop, it can be different shapes, and you certainly can get a plugin that makes it a triangle, but you still have access to all the same controls, and you can change this to other layouts as well. Unfortunately, there's not the triangle by default. Menu up at the top, all the same stuff you'd expect to find under edit, and you know, maybe some things are in a few different places, but it's still very logically sorted. Toolbars in the same place, same orientation, a lot of the same tools. So, you know, as far as the basic principles of the application and the basic functions, it is very similar, but I've not done a lot of customization to Photoshop, so it looks pretty simple, whereas there's all this junk going on here. This is all custom up here at the top. A lot of this, or most of this here, is all custom, you know, and the way that I've arranged things is a little bit customized. So I think if you know something about Painter, or you know something about Photoshop, you know something about both in a sense, because there's stuff that really carries and crosses over. You just have to find where it's located and then figure out how it works a little bit differently, and then you're good. Paul loves the tree now that I distorted it. Pizza Man says, any tips on painting with greater detail on a smaller screen? I use the Cintiq Companion. Primarily, I notice when I view my painting on a bigger screen, it's not as detailed. Could depend on the resolution you're using. If you're using a lower resolution, it might seem very detailed on a small screen. because if you zoom in a lot, you can't really see a whole lot. You know, with the companion, I know that the palettes take up space on the screen and so on. So you could work at a higher resolution. Try to minimize your interface too. Like if you can arrange things in a way that, you know, things that you need that are regularly accessible, if they can be there, but you can stack them in a way or move them off to the side or eliminate things, you can get a lot done with the express keys. And I just put out a video today about how to customize your express keys on the Wacom remote. And while that's not exactly the same as the express keys on the side of the Cintiq companion, you'll still be able to figure out what commands are useful and which ones aren't. So definitely check that out, because those buttons can do a lot of functions that you'd normally have to click on something on the screen to get to. You can make little shortcut things like I have here, and just the more you can free up the screen, the more you have room to paint, the more you can see. But I'm guessing that's probably more of a resolution issue. Some questions about free art applications. I do have a video on that. If you search my channel for free art applications, I have a pretty decent, thorough review of a bunch of the most popular applications and how they compare. Lots of good suggestions here. YHTR is here. Good to see you. Drago says they heard a YouTuber saying the Cintiq 16-inch is the best because it has the best pixel per inch. So the Cintiq Pro 16 and 13 and the new, I think it's a 24 and a 32 that are coming out, those are 4K resolution. So that's, you know, quite a bit more detailed than a standard 1080 screen. The Cintiq 27 that I'm using is only 1440 or 2K, so it's about roughly half as detailed as the 4K screen. So more pixels basically on the Cintiq Pros, meaning that you'll be able to see finer detail on higher resolution images. Low resolution images, however, are going to look like crap. I can tell you that, because if I watch my old HD videos on my Cintiq 27, they always look blurry. Because it doesn't matter if the screen has more pixels, if the content you're working on is a low-resolution video or a low-resolution piece of art, it's going to be blurry no matter what. And it kind of goes the same way, too. You know, if you have a really high-resolution image on a low-resolution screen, which might be the case for the Cintiq Companion, you might find that you're not able to see all that detail, and then when you go and you look at it later on a more high resolution screen, you see a little bit more detail. Susan says, so watching more of your videos to see how you switch back and forth and which program you use for what is a good idea, in my opinion. That would be a good idea to get a feel for that. I can give you a basic idea. Anything that's not painting, with a few exceptions of basic things like duplicating layers and copying and pasting and maybe a few effects that I did, like some of the blurring and stuff. Pretty much anything that's editing or adding text or manipulating or, you know, processing the image, adding bevels, adding effects. Anything that's basically just image manipulation and not actually painting brush strokes, I'm going to do in Photoshop. And it's typically the finishing touches. I'll do it intermittently throughout the piece. A good one to watch would be the Super Nintendo. Susan, you probably could give two craps about the Super Nintendo, as a lot of people do, and understandably, which is why I'm kind of disappointed, because I thought it was a cool painting and hasn't gotten a lot of views for how much effort I put into it. So I understand if content-wise it's not really that interesting to you, but correct me if I'm wrong. It is a good example of going back and forth between Photoshop, because you'll see I do the painting in Corel Painter, but then when I get to things like adding the labels to the buttons, which are text, and even fitting them into perspective and things like that, I'm doing that in Photoshop, you know, if I need to rotate or crop the image, I'm doing that in Photoshop. And you'll be able to see me go back and forth quite a few times with that one particular episode. It's a two-part series, so there's the console and then there's the controller. And both of those I go back and forth between Photoshop a lot. Okay, so what else do I want to do to this? I got running out of time here. Let's see. Sometimes when you get to the end of a piece, you've looked at it a lot and you've lost your interest in it, and you're kind of like second guessing yourself, and you're like, I don't know about this. It doesn't really look that cool. That's because you kind of got bored of it from working on it so long, you know. And I guess that's what would happen to your piece if anybody looked at it. You know, if you put it up in a gallery, people will look at it for a short period of time. But I think if you sat there and you looked at something for hours, I didn't spend 6 hours on this, but I'll easily spend 6 hours on a painting. And after you look at it for 6 hours, not counting in between when you're not really working on it and you're just kind of like looking at it. So let's say add in a couple extra hours for that. You see all the flaws, all the wow factors gone, and you're just like, whatever. And if somebody in a gallery looked at something for 6 or 8 hours, they'd probably eventually just kind of get bored of it too. So one of the good things to do towards the end of the painting, if you're starting to feel that way about the piece, you could do something really radical like I did, changing the colors and doing the distortion and stuff like that. But you can also do something very simple, which is just flip your canvas horizontally. And all of a sudden, even though all you really did was just reverse the order of everything, it looks like a new painting sometimes. And sometimes it looks better flipped. And so I can look at it now and go, it's kind of freshened up, you know? I like it better this way. I think I do like it better how it was. That might be because I'm not necessarily focusing on the composition, but I'm also focusing on where I'm at here on my screen. And so I'm filling this negative space in the live stream. And I feel like if I put the tree behind me, it kind of blocks the tree. So because of the live stream, it looks good like this, but it looked okay the other way too. Radically changing the colors can also really help for that. So I flatten my image here, and then I'll go to tonal control, adjust colors. And it didn't look too bad to brighten it up a bit. And then shifting the hue, especially for an abstract piece, can really make it more interesting. And like, that's kind of cool. Go with something like that where it's not too drastic of a shift. And I'm going to duplicate the layer. And then I'm going to drastically shift it. And then I'll add a mask. And do kind of like a vignette thing here. That's kind of cool. Maybe it's a little over the top. Maybe we can play with that a bit more. Oh, is it going to crash? I think we have a crash. Doesn't happen that often, but occasionally when you're working with complex masks, Corel Painter will crash. Now, one of the things I like about Corel Painter when it crashes is that 90-something% of the time you can recover your file. So what you want to do is search your computer for Corel Painter recovered files. That's found in Documents in Windows. And if you just open that file in Painter, So it's good when you're going to use masks like that, and it's usually only if you use masks like the airbrush or something that adds a lot of detail to the mask. When you're doing stuff like that, save before you create the mask. Just in case, you know, very, very rarely will you not be able to get a crashed file back. But look, I got all my layers perfectly fine, just like I'd saved it right when it crashed. So, we're good, we're back to normal. Kind of adds some interesting vignette to it. Susan says, okay, I'll check it out even though I'm not a fan of Super Nintendo. How did you know? It says, but apparently not a lot of people are. Not as many as I expected would be based on the number of views I should get. Because it's a pretty detailed painting, you know? But it's just, it doesn't matter how detailed of a painting you do. If it's of a subject that people aren't that interested in, you're not going to get a very good reception. I think of the people who did know what it was and thought of it fondly, those people were really impressed by it. But, you know, then there's still many, many more people who just, it's not their thing. I mean, for me personally, if someone was like, hey, check out my painting of an Xbox 360, I'd be like, I don't care how detailed it is. I don't like the Xbox 360. So, you know, there's consoles that I don't like either. Some people just don't like any video games, and that's fine too. Video games are a waste of time. I will be the first to say that I played my fair share of video games. I wasted a lot of time doing it. If I had spent that time making art, I'd be so much further ahead than I am now. And if I still played video games, and I had a PlayStation 4, or whatever kids are playing now, I wouldn't be able to do this channel. I'd be playing, like, you can't enjoy games that take up all of your time and all of your life and be productive. You really can't, because you're spending so many hours, like, it takes so many hours to play these games. If you want to play Atari or pinball or Nintendo or Super Nintendo or these simpler games that you can finish within a reasonable amount of time, or you can just play, like, without having to, like, complete every quest and all that stuff, that's fine. That's not going to eat up that much time, and I'll do that now and then. But these massive RPGs and things that people play nowadays, and these online games that never have an ending, that's sucking up all of your time. And I realized that in my 20s when those games came out, like World of Warcraft, that's exactly the kind of game that I would have liked, because I played Final Fantasy, and I was into those kind of games, and I saw my roommates playing them, and I was like, no, that's like crack for them. That's all they do. They don't go out and do anything. They don't have any social life, or a severely depleted social life, because all they're doing is playing those games. And it was like watching somebody do a crazy drug like that, you know, and seeing them get addicted to it. It scares you and it makes you not want to do it. So that was really where I kind of like broke off of even playing games at all, and really did it a lot less until I really don't really do it at all now, you know. Like, rarely I might play something, but dedicate all my time to making art and to making art videos. Paul's got to go. See you later, Paul. Thanks for watching. Jeremy really enjoyed the Super Nintendo video. Somebody says the painting looks like something you'd see on drugs. It very likely is something that you'd see on drugs. You know, I guess that's kind of there's pros and cons to drugs, usually a lot of drugs, but certain drugs in particular are mind expanding, and it's very interesting to think about that concept, that what you have up here when you're conscious in a normal state of mind is only capable of so much. And you don't even really need to do drugs. You can meditate, or you can close your eyes and you can think and imagine, or you can go to sleep. The things that I'll see in my mind when I'm sleeping are so vivid that I could never imagine them and draw them when I'm awake. I'll have lucid flying dreams where I'm flying around, and I'm flying over these whole cities with buildings, and everything is planned out in a certain way. It's not like I'm just flying over a couple of boxes or cartoon drawings of houses. They're very, very intricate things that I've never seen before, and maybe in some way they're cobbled together from pieces of aerial shots that I've seen of cities, but a lot of the times they're just unique fantasy places that don't exist. And either I'm connecting to some eternal knowledge in viewing something that does exist in astral projection, or my mind is just capable of so much more in a semi-conscious or subconscious state. So I'm not in any way encouraging people to do drugs. I'm just simply talking a bit about what they can do. And, you know, there's ayahuasca, for instance. A lot of South American native tribes use it, and it will really mess you up. It'll like scare you and make you puke, and you'll feel horrible. But the experiences people have with it, it can help with trauma. It can help with addiction. It can do a lot of things, and it could just help people figure out things in life, you know. So you don't need drugs to do it, but to be able to expand your consciousness or get a different point of view on something is very beneficial as far as art is concerned, because, you know, if your goal is to paint realistically, you should probably lay off the drugs, because you need every brain cell you can get to do stuff like that. But I think if you're doing abstract art, you know, to be able to see and experience the world in a way that most people wouldn't see and experience it, and then to be able to take that and translate that into art is kind of an interesting thing. Usually when people do drugs, though, they aren't very good at art. So it makes you think that you're really good at art when in fact you're not. You're just making a fool of yourself. YHTR wants to know, how old am I? I am 34 years old. Susan thinks it looks like Halloween, perfect timing with fall coming. It's kind of Halloween-y. It's unsettling. So it's getting to be about that time where I've started to rant about ayahuasca and hallucinations and whatnot, rather than painting. So I should probably hit the old dusty trail, and you should all probably get some sleep. Unless, of course, it's daytime where you're at, and then in that case, you should probably not sleep, because that would be weird. I am going to suggest that if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do, because that's the best way to get notifications when I'm releasing new videos or live streaming. And if I schedule a live stream, as long as you have notifications enabled, you will get a little notification. People always want to know when I'm going to do the next live stream. I don't always know that. Tentatively, we could say it could be next Friday again, because I've been doing them on Fridays, and that seems to work. Don't know whether it'll be in the morning or in the evening. If you would like to support my channel and encourage me to do more live streams like this, definitely click that super chat button. It's that little $ in the bottom of the chat. It won't hurt you. It won't bite. It'll let you donate money, even if it's just $1. Everything helps. I feel like a televangelist here. Daddy needs money. For new shoes. Daddy needs a new pair of shoes. Super chat. But if not, just liking this video, sharing this video, that's all good too. Subscribing. Anything to help support my channel is greatly appreciated. Keith says it's 1:50 p.m. here in Tokyo, but I am sleepy. I worked 18 hours yesterday. Dang, Keith. Gotta take it easy. That's how it goes sometimes, though. All right, everybody. Well, I will go ahead and get some sleep myself. Thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you all next time.